I knew something was wrong the moment I saw my daughter-in-law's hand hover over my wife's glass. It was just for a second. A small movement. Easy to miss in a room full of laughter, music, and clinking glasses. But after 68 years of life, after raising children and burying friends, you learn to notice the things that don't belong. And that moment didn't belong. My wife, Margaret, was sitting beside me on the couch, smiling politely like she always did. She was wearing the blue sweater she only brought out during Christmas, the one she said made her feel put together even when her hands trembled a little from age. The house was packed. Our son's house. Our Christmas party. And yet, for the first time in my life, I felt like a guest who wasn't truly welcome. Before we go on, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next dramatic family stories. And if you're listening to this story anywhere on your phone, your computer, or your TV, leave a comment and let me know. Now, let's continue with what happened right after that moment. My name is Henry. I'm a grandfather. And I never thought the greatest threat to my family would come wrapped in a red dress and a fake smile. The Christmas lights were bright, but the warmth in that house felt artificial. Our son Daniel had insisted we come early, said he wanted family time before the guests arrived. But the moment his wife, Claire, opened the door and saw us standing there with wrapped gifts and tired smiles, something in her eyes hardened. Not anger. Calculation. Henry, Margaret, she said, hugging the air near us instead of our bodies. You made it. Margaret squeezed my arm gently. I knew what that meant. Be patient, be kind. She was always the peacemaker. Claire moved quickly after that, directing people, adjusting decorations, laughing loudly whenever someone important spoke. She was a woman who knew how to perform warmth without ever feeling it. Margaret and I stayed quiet. We always did. As the house filled, I noticed how rarely Claire looked at us. When she did, it was with the same expression one gives an old piece of furniture, something useful once, now just taking up space. Dinner came and went. Margaret barely ate. She said she felt a little dizzy, but brushed it off as too much noise. That should have been my first warning. After dinner, drinks were served. Wine, eggnog, fancy glasses that made Margaret nervous to hold. Claire poured them herself. I watched her carefully, not because I suspected anything yet, but because something about her movements felt rushed, controlled, intentional. Margaret's glass was placed on the coffee table in front of her. Then Claire leaned down, smiling, pretending to adjust a coaster. And that's when it happened. Her hand dipped toward the glass. A tiny movement of her fingers. A pause. Then she straightened up, like nothing had happened. My heart began to pound so loudly, I was sure others could hear it. Henry, Margaret whispered, "Can you hand me my drink?" I didn't answer right away. I stared at the glass. Clear liquid, no smell, nothing unusual. But I had spent my life fixing machines. You learn that the most dangerous faults are the ones you can't see. I picked up the glass, and instead of handing it to my wife, I swapped it with mine. Margaret frowned. "Oh, Henry, that's yours." I smiled gently. "I know, dear, but you always say mine tastes better." She laughed softly, the way she always did when she didn't want to argue. Claire noticed. Her eyes flicked to the glasses. Just for a second. And in that second, I saw it. Panic. Not loud panic, not dramatic panic. The quiet kind that lives behind carefully practiced smiles. "Dad," Daniel called from across the room. "You okay over there?" "Perfect," I said, raising the glass slightly. Claire's hand tightened around the tray she was holding. Margaret took a sip from my original glass, completely unaware. I did not drink. I just held it. Waiting. Minutes passed. Laughter rose and fell. Someone turned the music up. Wrapping paper crinkled. And then Claire approached me. "Henry," she said softly, kneeling down to my level like a caring daughter-in-law, "you're not drinking." I looked at her calmly, just savoring the moment. Her smile twitched. "You should," she said. "It's good wine." "I'm sure it is." Margaret leaned toward me. "Henry, are you feeling all right? You're quiet." I put my hand over hers. "I'm just listening." Claire stood up too quickly. She walked away, whispering something urgently to Daniel. That's when I knew. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. And this Christmas was about to reveal a truth I had never wanted to see. Because if Claire had slipped something into that drink, then the question was why. The question was how long she had been waiting to do it. And worse, what would have happened if I hadn't been watching? Claire didn't come back to us for a long time. She busied herself near the kitchen, laughing too loudly with people she barely knew, refilling bowls that were already full, straightening decorations that didn't need fixing. But every few seconds, her eyes drifted back to me. To the glass still untouched in my hand. Margaret leaned closer. "Henry, why aren't you drinking? You usually enjoy a little wine at Christmas." I lowered my voice. "Do you feel all right?" She nodded, a little tired. "Maybe I'll sit for a bit." That answer didn't calm me. If Claire had intended something for Margaret, even a small amount could already be working its way through her body. I stood slowly. "Let's get you some fresh air." Before Margaret could reply, Claire appeared beside us again, like she had been summoned by instinct. "Oh, don't go outside," she said quickly. "It's cold, Margaret, you'll catch something." Her concern sounded rehearsed. "I'll be fine," Margaret said kindly. "Just a minute." Claire's smile stiffened. "Maybe you should sit down instead." That was the moment I stopped pretending. I looked directly at her. "Claire, where did you get this wine?" The room didn't fall silent, but something shifted. A few conversations nearby slowed. Claire blinked. "What?" "The wine," I repeated calmly. "You poured it yourself. I'm curious where it came from." She laughed, sharp and short. "From the bottle, Henry, where else?" Daniel glanced over, sensing tension. "Dad, what's going on?" "Nothing," Claire said quickly. "Your father's just being, well, overprotective." I didn't take my eyes off her. "Did you put anything in my wife's drink?" The words were quiet, but they landed like glass shattering. Margaret gasped, "Henry." Claire's face drained of color so fast it was almost frightening. "What kind of accusation is that?" she snapped. "Are you out of your mind?" Daniel stepped between us. "Dad, that's enough." I held up the glass. "I haven't touched it." Claire's breathing changed, quick, shallow. "Then drink it," she said suddenly. "If you think something's wrong, drink it." Daniel looked confused. "Claire." "Drink it," she insisted, eyes locked on me. "Prove you're not making this up." Margaret gripped my arm. "Henry, please, don't cause a scene." I smiled at my wife. "I won't." Then I turned to Daniel. "Son, do you trust your wife?" "Of course I do." "Then you won't mind if we take this glass to be tested." Claire laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. "Tested? You're embarrassing yourself." "Good," I said, "because I've been embarrassed quietly for years." The room had gone noticeably quieter now. Someone turned the music down. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Dad, you're ruining Christmas." "No," I said softly, "I'm protecting my wife." Margaret's hand trembled in mine. "Henry, maybe we should just go home." Claire's eyes lit up at that. "Yes, that's a good idea. You're both tired." I shook my head. "Not yet." I walked toward the kitchen, glass in hand. Daniel followed. Claire hesitated, then rushed after us. In the kitchen, I placed the glass on the counter. "I want to know why," I said. "Why what?" Claire shot back. "Why you did it." Daniel looked between us. Did what? Claire slammed her hand on the counter. This is insane. I didn't do anything. I leaned in slightly, then drink it. Silence. Her mouth opened, closed. Daniel stared at her. Claire. She swallowed. I'm not thirsty. I picked up the glass again. Then I will. Margaret cried out, Henry, no. Claire lunged forward. Don't. Too late. I raised the glass to my lips. I didn't swallow. I let a single drop touch my tongue. It tasted bitter. Not wine. Something else. My stomach turned instantly. I set the glass down carefully as my vision swam. Daniel grabbed my arm. Dad. Claire stepped back, hands shaking. Henry, Margaret cried. I steadied myself against the counter. Call an ambulance. What? Daniel shouted. Now, I said, and tell them what's in that glass. Claire slid down against the cabinet, her strength suddenly gone. I didn't mean, she whispered. I just wanted her to sleep, just for the night. The room spun. Margaret knelt beside me, tears streaming. Why, Claire, why? Claire's voice cracked. Because she won't let go, because this is my family now. Daniel stared at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. And as the sirens began to echo in the distance, I realized something chilling. This wasn't a moment of madness. It was a plan. And if I hadn't switched those glasses, Margaret might never have woken up. The hospital lights were too bright for a night like that. They washed everything in a pale white that made faces look older, fear look sharper, and silence feel heavier. Margaret sat beside me in a wheelchair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, lips moving in quiet prayer. I could feel her shaking even though she tried hard to hide it. I was the one who tasted the drink. But she was the one who had almost paid the price. A nurse pushed us down the corridor while Daniel walked a few steps behind, his head lowered, his shoulders slumped like a boy who had just learned the world was not what he believed it to be. Claire was nowhere in sight. 2 police officers had arrived at the house just minutes after the ambulance. I remembered the sound of their boots on the floor, the way Claire wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, the way she kept repeating the same sentence over and over. I didn't want to hurt her, I swear. I just needed her out of the way. Out of the way. Those words echoed in my head as the doctor finally approached us. Mr. Henry, he said gently, checking my chart, you're lucky you only had minimal exposure. Whatever was in that drink was a sedative, strong enough to cause loss of consciousness, especially in someone your wife's age. Margaret gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth. How long? I asked. If she had consumed the full glass, the doctor replied carefully, she could have been unconscious for many hours, possibly longer. And if no one noticed? I asked. The doctor didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. Margaret broke down then, not loud sobs, just quiet tears sliding down her cheeks as she leaned her head against my chest. I trusted her, she whispered. I welcomed her into our family. I held her as best I could with the IV in my arm. You didn't do anything wrong, I said softly. Kindness is never a mistake. Daniel stood frozen near the wall. Why? He finally asked. Why would she do this? I looked at my son, really looked at him, the lines of stress on his face, the confusion, the guilt. Sit down, I said. He did. There are things, I began slowly, that you don't see when you're busy building your own life. Small moments, little looks, sharp words said when no one else is listening. Daniel swallowed. Your wife has wanted control from the start, I continued, not just of the house, of you, of us, of every place where love existed before she arrived. Margaret nodded faintly. She hated that you still called us for advice, she added. She hated that Henry helped you with the down payment. She hated that you visited us. Daniel covered his face with his hands. She said you were manipulating me, he whispered. She said you made her feel small. I never raised my voice to her, Margaret said. Not once. I know, I replied. A police officer entered quietly. Mr. Henry, Mrs. Henry, we need to ask a few questions. Claire had confessed more than she meant to. The sedative wasn't prescribed to her. She had taken it from her sister's medicine cabinet weeks ago. She had waited, planned, chosen Christmas night because, in her words, everyone would assume Margaret just fell asleep. Fell asleep. Daniel shook his head slowly, like he was trying to wake from a nightmare. I married a stranger. No, I said firmly. You married someone who showed you only what she wanted you to see. The officer cleared his throat. Mr. Daniel, you may also want to know, your wife asked if the glass was meant for you. Daniel looked up sharply. What? She wasn't sure which one your father would drink from, the officer said. She asked several times. The room went very quiet. Margaret squeezed my hand. Henry. That was the moment I understood something that chilled me more than the taste of that drink ever could. If I hadn't been watching, if I hadn't swapped the glasses, this story would not be about a hospital visit. It would be about a funeral. Daniel stood up slowly, his face pale. Where is she now? In custody, the officer replied, for now. Daniel nodded once. I want to see her. I shook my head. Not tonight. He looked at me, eyes full of pain. Dad, I didn't protect you, or Mom. You're protecting us now, I said, by finally seeing the truth. Later that night, after Margaret was cleared to go home, and I was released with strict instructions, Daniel walked us to the car. Snow had begun to fall, soft, quiet, innocent. I don't know what happens next, he said. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Next, you choose what kind of man you want to be. Margaret leaned into him and kissed his cheek. We still love you, she said. He broke down then. As we drove away, Christmas lights blurred past the window, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself to feel something other than fear. Resolve. Because Claire's actions had failed. But the damage she caused was far from over. And what came next would test our family in ways none of us were ready for. The days after Christmas felt longer than the years before it. The house Margaret and I lived in had always been quiet, but now the silence carried weight. Every ticking second sounded like a question with no answer. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, lights glowing softly, but neither of us had the heart to turn them on anymore. Margaret barely slept. When she did, she woke up gasping, her hands searching for mine like she was afraid I might disappear if she let go. I stayed awake most nights, listening to her breathing, replaying that moment over and over in my head, the glass, Claire's eyes, the bitterness on my tongue. Daniel called every morning. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes he just breathed on the other end of the line. 3 days after Christmas, he finally came over. He looked thinner, older, like someone had taken the future he imagined and torn it in half. I filed for separation, he said quietly, sitting across from us at the kitchen table. The lawyer says what she did is serious, very serious. Margaret nodded, but there was no relief in her eyes. Was she ever sorry? Daniel hesitated. She cried, he said, but every time she explained herself, it came back to the same thing. She said she felt like she was competing with you, like she had to win. Win what? I asked. My loyalty, he whispered. That word hurt more than anger ever could. I pushed my chair back slightly. Love is not a contest, I said, and family isn't something you erase to prove devotion. Daniel rubbed his eyes. I should have seen it. Yes, I said gently, but you didn't, and now you have to live with that truth. Margaret reached across the table and took his hand. What matters is what you do now. He nodded, tears slipping down his face. She asked about you. I felt my chest tighten. What did she ask? If you're going to testify. Margaret inhaled sharply. I will, I said without hesitation. Daniel looked up. Dad. I will, I repeated, not out of revenge, out of responsibility. Weeks passed. Claire was formally charged. The words felt unreal when we heard them spoken out loud. Neighbors whispered, family members chose sides. Some people couldn't believe someone so polished could do something so cruel. Others didn't want to believe it. Margaret was asked to give a statement. She sat at the dining table, hands folded, voice calm but fragile, as she described the way Claire smiled at her that night, the way she trusted her. When it was my turn, I told the truth. Every detail. The hovering hand. The swapped glass. The panic. The officer nodded slowly as I spoke. You saved her life, he said. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man who had almost lost everything because he assumed kindness was enough. One afternoon, Daniel showed up unannounced. She wants to see you, he said. Margaret stiffened. Absolutely not. I won't, I said quickly, but I'll hear you out. She wrote a letter, Daniel continued, pulling an envelope from his coat, said it was meant for both of you. I didn't open it right away. That night, after Margaret fell asleep, I sat alone at the table and read it. Claire wrote about fear, about feeling invisible, about how she believed Margaret was the only obstacle between her and a perfect family. Not once did she write the word sorry. She wrote justified. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer. The next day, I went to see her. Not for closure. Not for forgiveness. For clarity. She looked smaller behind the glass. No makeup, no confidence, just a woman cornered by her own choices. You ruined my life, she said as soon as she saw me. No, I replied calmly, you revealed it. Her eyes filled with anger. She never liked me. She loved you, I said. You just didn't recognize love that didn't revolve around you. She laughed bitterly. You think you're better than me. No, I said softly, I think I stopped you. I stood to leave. As I turned away, she spoke again. If you hadn't switched the glasses. I looked back at her. But I did. When I returned home, Margaret was waiting by the window. It's over, she asked. No, I said, but it's ending. She leaned her head against my shoulder. Outside, the snow had melted, leaving the streets bare and honest. And in that moment, I understood something deeply. Sometimes survival isn't about strength. It's about paying attention when others don't. And choosing to act, even when no one is watching. The trial was set for early spring. By then the snow had melted, the Christmas decorations were gone, and life outside seemed determined to move on. But inside our home, time felt suspended, like we were all waiting for something to finally settle. Margaret grew stronger with each passing week, not just physically, but in a quiet way I had never seen before. She started walking every morning again, her steps slow but steady. She cooked, she laughed softly at old television shows, and sometimes she would stop in the middle of a task, look at me, and say, I'm still here. Each time she said it, my chest tightened. Daniel moved out of the house he once shared with Claire. He rented a small apartment closer to work and farther from memory. He came by every Sunday. Sometimes we talked about the case. Most times, we didn't. The hardest part wasn't the courtroom. It was the waiting. When the day finally came, Margaret insisted on sitting beside me. Her hand rested on mine the entire time, steady, warm, alive. Claire didn't look at us when she entered. She looked smaller than I remembered, not because of the room, but because power had left her. No rehearsed smile, no control over the narrative, just consequences. When I took the stand, I spoke slowly. I told them about the party, about the hovering hand, about the swapped glass. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize. I simply told the truth. When Margaret testified, Her voice trembled, but it didn't break. I trusted her, she said. I believed family meant safety. The courtroom was silent. Claire's lawyer tried to paint it as stress, as jealousy, as a moment of weakness. But moments don't wait weeks. Moments don't involve stolen medication. Moments don't depend on someone else falling asleep forever. When the verdict was read, Margaret closed her eyes. Guilty. Claire finally looked at us then. Not with anger, not with fear, but with something worse. Regret that had arrived too late. Daniel didn't celebrate. He didn't cry, he just exhaled, like a man who had been holding his breath for years without realizing it. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, but we walked past them without a word. At home that evening, Margaret and I sat together on the porch as the sun dipped low. I keep thinking about that glass, she said quietly. So do I replied. She turned to me, you saved me. I shook my head, I noticed. She smiled softly, that's the same thing. Daniel joined us a little later. He looked lighter somehow, not happy but honest. I'm sorry, he said, for not seeing, for not protecting you. Margaret stood and hugged him. You're here now. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. I thought about how close we came to losing everything, how easily trust can be abused, how dangerous silence can be. And I understood something I wish I had learned earlier in life. Evil doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles, pours a drink, and waits. But so does love. Love watches. Love acts. Love refuses to look away. And sometimes, love survives because someone makes a small choice at the exact right moment. Like swapping a glass. And if you've stayed with this story until the very end, I truly appreciate your time. Please give it a like if it moved you. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next family drama stories, and share with anyone you think might care. Thank you for listening. Your support is what allows these stories to be.